Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Kathy Turner, and we are very excited to be doing this webinar. Before I do my introductions, I have to tell a funny story. Many, many years ago, when I probably had 2 golden retrievers, I was moaning at a dinner about how judges just didn't pay enough attention to movement. And I was sitting next to this man named Andrew Brace at the dinner, along with some other judges. Andrew was a little bit quiet, and he finally said, well, I hope if you ever decide to judge, you will learn the importance of type. So I come to you as somebody who was more than 35 years ago schooled by Andrew Brace. With that, I would like to introduce our participants and tell you a little bit about each of them. Just below me is, but I don't know how it is on your chart, is Patricia Flanagan. Pat is a judge. She is a breeder. She has been a handler. And I know she'll have some interesting things to say. He's the author of several books, including The Essential Guide to Judging Dogs. And with Anne Rogers Clark, he co-edited the International Encyclopedia of Dogs. I think most of us would give our eye teeth to do anything with Anne Rogers Clark. He's well known as an author. He's judged extensively overseas, including in the United States. He's judged Crufts, Westminster, and the AKC champion shows. And he had as a golden mentor, Joan Tudor, who wrote the first book I ever read about golden retrievers, one of the truly great breeders from the UK. Dr. Sturz is probably a bit more familiar to those of you on this side of the pond, as we've been saying and putting this together. He started with his family and has been showing dogs his entire life. He was ranked as the country's #1 junior handler for 3 consecutive years and has participated in conformation, field events, and obedience. He has bred, owned, and handled all breed and specialty best in show winners in a number of breeds, including golden retrievers, poodles, and Pembroke Welsh corgis. He's been judging since 1990 and has judged at the most prestigious dog shows nationally and internationally, including 9 times at Westminster. He has also judged the golden retriever specialty twice. And many of you probably recognize him from being the commentator on at the Garden. He's the guy who actually ever so gently corrects the people who give the wrong information, is how I like to think of his role there. We will not get to see Donald in that role this year because he has been selected as the best in show judge for, I lose track of the years anymore, 2022. And he also won the Judge of the Year award in 2020. So that's why we're so excited. We wanted to do this webinar because we read Andrew's article about how breeds change and moderation in dogs, and our committee of 5 who work as one was just taken with how we've seen that over the years. And so we have asked Andrew to explain why he wrote the article. So he's here as our kind of internationalist and maybe a distant view, while Dr. Sturz is here as one of our very own, a breeder, owner, handler, who has mentored so many of us and dazzled us with his knowledge. So Andrew, let me start by asking you why you wrote that article. Why did you write the article about how breeds change?
Well, it struck me pretty much the way it struck everyone in the committee. Our breed has changed over the years in lots of ways. And Andrew's article just depicts why that happens. From how breeders pick their puppies to what motivates them to pick a certain puppy. And I think it's worth discussing because we need to correct some things that I think need correcting.
So Andrew, why did you write the article? Why did you start this whole thing?
I think basically it was prompted by the fact that, you know, I was in a fortunate position to be traveling around, you know, visiting various countries. And some of the breeds that were, you know, sort of closest to my heart, I was just noticing that you know, in some places and in some instances in the UK, breeds were drifting away from my mental template. You know, when we first get involved or interested in a breed, we have a picture in our mind of the ideal, and that picture it's actually evolving throughout time, because your mental template of a breed is governed by what you consider to be the best specimen of that breed that you've ever seen. So you're kind of upgrading it all the time. But I was seeing, you know, in some breeds, shifts in essential shape, in some cases in heads. And having spent so much time with Mrs. Clark on the encyclopedia, you know, we got to know each other fairly well. And of course, she was the lady that coined that wonderful expression, the drag of a breed, where a fault appears gradually that tends to actually become endemic in that breed. And it happens so gradually that the people who are involved with the breed hardly notice it, because it happens over a period of time. And this is where I think the non-specialist has a very keen role to play, because breeder judges who are living with a breed 24/7 do not notice that these things are happening. Whereas someone who possibly judges the breed maybe, you know, every 18 months or so, will come into a breed and look at a representative entry and say, hi, you know, don't you folks realize that these dogs are, for example, getting really short on the leg or long in the line or whatever. And sometimes it takes someone from outside to come in and put a spotlight on Mrs. Clark's drag. And then, having sort of been a little bit disturbed by this, I then started to think about why these things happen. And, you know, after sort of analyzing the situation, thinking about it and talking to people, that's where, you know, the first of several similar articles appeared. And it was simply because, you know, and it goes back to, you know, from the breeder's selection of a puppy. So basically, that's what prompted the first article. Does that make sense?
It does.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, when we talk about these shifts or these changes, I personally think that it happens repeatedly over time in different forms. You know, I can speak to, you know, Golden's, you know, specifically, and just in my lifetime of experience in the breed, I can kind of go to certain points in time where particular elements became more present and of concern, right? Because they had started to stray from what was seen as most typical. You know, without going into who was responsible or why or what, but there have been times in our history, at least I'll talk in the last 50 years, because that's my frame of reference. I can remember a time when the conversation was, they're getting too big. There were dogs who were, you know, coming to notice, who were becoming very successful in the ring, and people were concerned that these dogs themselves, and then the offspring, because judges are now choosing for these dogs who are winning, that size is becoming less of a concern for judges and less of a concern for breeders. And therefore, there was a lot of conversation around paying attention to not only height, but body substance, right? There were, people felt that the dogs were getting too cloddy, right? Too heavy bone, too big body, too lumbering when they moved. Then there's another point in history where it actually went completely the opposite direction. There were some dogs who started having great success who were actually much less of a dog in head quality, body substance, even size and frame. And the breed started to kind of sway too far in that direction, right? And so I think that there are moments in time when these things happen, but we have to have a conversation about it. And I think this is a great opportunity for this kind of conversation, because you'd mentioned there's both breeders and judges here, because there's always that argument, well, who's most responsible? Well, if the judges didn't choose them, right, they wouldn't be winning, then the breeders and the owners wouldn't be compelled to try to have that animal who's winning, right? The other side of the story is judges can only judge what walks in the ring. And so I think today we're kind of getting at that to some degree. Today, I've heard the comments, kind of focusing more on proportions, right? We're concerned about proportions, but in many breeds, there are different points in time in which different elements or factors are becoming more present that are not so desirable. And I think the conversation needs to be had about that. I also think from a judge's perspective, this is a really great example, and to my AKC friends who may be on here, shout out to Sandy and Patty. I do think that the rate at which judges are proceeding through the approval system and so on, and the focus on standards tests and attending events and watching, what's missing in all of that is the knowledge about where a breed is at that time. What are the things that are happening right now that, as Andrew framed, are a drag on the breed? What are the things that are hard to acquire in a breed and should be very highly valued, and why? Those are part of the learning that I don't think is happening so much in our judges' preparation anymore. And I'll get off that soapbox. Carry on.
Well, do you feel, Donnie, that if judges' education was a little more direct in some of the problems within the breed that should maybe not be awarded, putting the focus there would help in the long run to dissuade breeders from continuously breeding that style of dog?
Yeah, I think it's a concerted effort and a commitment on then everyone's part, that it's about protecting the breed, right, and preserving the breed, and the reason why. It's not about, well, we don't want you to win anymore. It's, we need to preserve the breed in the form in which it was intended to be. And that all goes back to talking about, and we'll probably get to that, right, talking about the original function of a breed and how conformation relates to that function, how it relates to conformation features like, head properties and coat texture and so on. And I don't think it's just about judges' education. I think it's about breeders' education, because breeders have to be judges. They're judging an entry when they look in that whelping box, and they need to be able to ascertain, and to evaluate, sort, much like we do when we're standing in the middle of the ring. And I think to be able to understand why they're making those choices. I know Andrew and I think would both feel very comfortable critiquing a class. It's something that I think both of us are of a similar mind, and for him, it's a more common practice, where he judges, that I feel like I can talk about every dog that I placed and why. I know exactly why I did what I did. And breeders need to know that. Breeders should be able to articulate that conversation as to why they chose this or chose that. And I think that could be part of the breeder education is actual evaluation of dogs. Not everybody has to be a judge, but every breeder is a judge.
Actually, this year at Breeders Education, which Pat is in charge of, we're doing some of that, because I think Breeders Education has been not as active as it could be in really trying to bring people information. And Andrew has talked about breeding to the blueprint. Do you want to comment on that, Andrew?
Well, I think, you know, obviously the breed standard, regardless of the breed, is the starting point. That's the starting point. Breed standards can be interpreted differently up to a point. But, you know, when it comes to mating a bitch to a dog and selecting a puppy, the breed standard is what should be uppermost in our mind. Now, Donnie touched early on the fact that, you know, most of our breeds are sort of function based. And I think, you know, we need to, before you even contemplate breeding a litter, you need to have a grasp of where the breed is coming from. Now, as far as most of the sort of gun dog and sporting breeds are concerned, it has to be accepted that, you know, the standards were focused on original function. But having said that, we still have to sort of, we have to be really realistic in our perspective when we're in the show ring. And whilst, you know, we are looking for virtues that are function related, at the same time, let's not forget, you know, when these guys first started going to dog shows to compare breeding stock, yes, they wanted dogs that could do the job they were bred for. But at the same time, they had invented this competitive environment, and they also wanted dogs that looked good. So even though there was a sort of function-based requirement, they still wanted something that was aesthetically pleasing. And whilst a lot of the aspects of for example, the head in a breed like the Golden Retriever are related to the job of work, at the same time, you know, when it comes to selling Golden Retriever puppies, the vast majority of pet people that buy a golden puppy fall in love with that expression, that face. And it's a face that you would trust with your life, kindly expression. Now, that isn't necessarily function related. So we do have to sort of get the balance that we want the nuts and bolts, but at the same time, we are looking for aesthetic qualities which make that breed more appealing as regards the overall package.
I agree. I think that's part of where sometimes we go awry in some of, especially the sporting breeds, where we have performance dogs and so on, is people are forgetting about that aesthetics aspect. When you're just mentioning expression, to me, I see that as part of the essence of the breed. You know, it may not essentially relate in and of itself to the function, but it certainly conveys the character of the breed and one of the things for which it's known best, right? And so what are the factors that go into creating that beautiful head and expression that, as you put, is the world knows them for, right? And so it as a judge, you know, I'm very aware of that. I still have to take in the whole picture. I have to take in the whole animal. But that moment, that's my first typical engagement, right? My first engagement is an overall outline. But my first intimate engagement with any dog in the ring is really when I walk up and I look in those eyes, no matter what breed it is. And it should convey to me something about the essence of that breed, right? It's temperament, it's character. And so I think that's really important for us, you know, to keep in place. And that, I think this is also a point where we need to be careful about confusing the word moderate and mediocre, because that's another thing that I think has at times gotten in the way for many sporting breeds, including Goldens. And it speaks right to what Andrew was talking about, those details that make for a high quality example of animal. There's something stylistically about the way the head is finished. There's something about the texture of the coat and the way it lays to the body. There's something about the way one piece flows and fits into another smoothly and cleanly. There's something about the way that dog carries themselves, right? The way in which they go. And those are the places that set the great apart from the just good or mediocre. And I think those are some things that we can pay attention to. Those are things we could do better with. I think we have a lot of nice dogs. I don't think the breed is in dire straits as sometimes the conversations get to be, but I do feel that it's unfortunately plagued with a lot of kind of nice, good dogs and not a lot of greatness, not a lot of presentation of those really beautiful, essential details that kind of make the hair stand up on my arms, right? Or makes my heart beat a little bit faster. And that's what you want. You should want, I want that as a judge. You should want that as a breeder, as an owner, that you have those moments that a dog possesses those qualities to such a degree and at such a level that it makes your heart beat a little faster.
Well, Don, you brought up the term moderation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how the breed, are we holding on to moderation? Are we going to extremes, one way or the other, in your opinion?
I think currently, right now, I see very few of the dogs that I would say are as extreme as some of the dogs I saw in the recent past. I think the pendulum swung back to some degree in outline. I can talk from my experience, having judged the national with a large entry of bitches, and I would say that for me, my reaction was fairly positive when I stood back and I looked at lineups, or at least had made my cuts and lined up my classes. My issues were not in profile, so therefore not in proportion per se. My issues were more about the kinds of things that you have to see up close or you have to feel with your hands, that I think perhaps in this day and age, we've gotten overly comfortable with making choices based on photos, making choices based on videos, that kind of thing, without actually getting our hands on dogs. When I looked down over the top of bitches, not seeing enough spring of rib, seeing very narrow loins, like almost a wasp waist, putting my hands on, not feeling depth, not feeling forechest, not feeling the bone in the leg. Much of the appearance of bone was coat rather than actual bone. So those are things that you have to get your hands on to know it. And so I think that might be part of our education, is to say, what, before you make choices about stud dogs, right? Maybe try to get your hands on them, right? Try to get your hands on their offspring, or so you're dealing with a little bit more information than just a visual, right? We can talk about, and we will talk about, proportions and so on, because I think that's really important. In this breed, it's important in all breeds. It's part of what makes that template. And in my choices of breeds, interestingly, that I focused on, golden retrievers, poodles, and Pembroke Welsh corgis, are really an exercise, right? In looking at an off-square breed, a square breed, and a long level breed. So my eye is very attuned to the importance of proportions, and so we'll talk more about that as well. But I think currently, understanding what goes into the proportions, that's something we can talk about. That's part of education, right? What's within that 12-11, and where do you measure it from, and what makes it up is length. When we look at the length, where is the length in the body? Is it, rib cage and loin, or mostly loin? What's the length of the leg? What's making up for those proportions? We can talk about that when we look at some of the pictures, okay, and say that we've gotten this presentation. But I do think we have to move from this format, which is wonderful, right? Visuals are a great place to start, and conversation is a great place to start. But I think breeders' education has to take it to hands-on experiences where people can get their hands on dogs and feel dogs and talk about dogs and talk comfortably about dogs. I would love that. You could invite me to that. That I'd show up for.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now.
Pat will send you the date, because that's exactly what she's doing. That's exactly what she's doing this year.
Fabulous.
You mentioned, and she wanted to do it last year, but we didn't have a national last year. So you are definitely in her wheelhouse. Pat, that question that came in about protecting the feelings of breeders.
Yes, I saw that one down there.
Why don't you check with Andrew and see how he feels about that? Because they do critiques in the UK and all countries except the United States. I wish we did them here. And I want to know how that gets handled in a critique.
The question, Andrew, was is protecting the feelings of the breeders more important than protecting the breed? It's frustrating when the same dogs that are incorrect in coat type, proportion, exaggerated movement, et cetera, is it taboo to openly discuss the fear of repercussions by the big breeder or those who select judges' specialties?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's that question isn't specifically geared towards critiques. The simple answer to the question is no. Of course, that protecting the breed is far more important than protecting, the feelings or the more specifically the ego of any particular breeder or exhibitor. But going back to Kathy's point about critiques and how you handle them. Obviously, it depends very much on the culture and where you've grown up, basically. Americans generally are not used to detailed critiques, other than in isolated situations. We in the UK tended to be, we had a system where at one point it was first, second, and third in every class was critique in the weekly papers. That's now shrunk a little. Then when you go to the more serious of the FCI countries, and I always tend to think of the Scandinavian countries as being an ideal example of those, you get a detailed critique on every single dog, regardless of what it wins. And in addition, you get a quality grading. So you have to remember that if you grow up in the Scandinavian countries, and you have taken your, it may be a pet, it may be a puppy that was bought as a pet, it may be a puppy that was bought as a show dog, but the chances are you will have taken it to sort of what they call unofficial shows from the age of 4 months on, where you will just have had basic critiques. And the Scandinavians are very, very thorough and very frank with their critiquing. So if you've got a 4-month-old puppy and you've taken it to a succession of unofficial shows, regularly, you can get to a situation where the dog is 6 months old and you've now got the opportunity to spend a lot of money taking it to, official shows. But if you've had 10 critiques on this dog and 8 of them have pointed out that your dog has yellow eyes, then as an exhibitor, you are far better placed to make the decision whether or not you want to actually show this dog seriously. I mean, the critique, serves a great purpose, because it, firstly, I mean, it shows, it gives the exhibitor an opinion. And, the theory is we show dogs for the judge's opinion, whereas in reality, 8 times out of 10, depending on the country, you don't actually get an opinion, you get a ribbon or not. So the critique serves to give the opinion to the exhibitor. The critique also, I think, actually is a great reflection on the judge that wrote it, because critiques, when you read them, can be very, very enlightening, and tells you a hell of a lot about the judge that actually wrote them. And I love writing critiques. I love the Scandinavian system. I wish we could do more critiques in the UK. And I love the fact that exhibitors accept constructive criticism. A lot of British judges, when they start going to Scandinavia, because we're not used to doing it as directly, they'll just list the sort of, appealing points of the dog, but they'll never actually mention any faults, because it's not the way that they were sort of brought up. And in various instances, I've seen Scandinavian exhibitors, come out of the ring, read a critique from a British judge. And the first thing they'll say is, well, he didn't even notice that he's got a gay tail or whatever. They expect that criticism. But of course, if you're writing a comprehensive critique, there are ways of wording things. And, you know, in my judging seminars, one of the examples I used to give was, you know, would prefer a slightly cleaner back skull means exactly the same as has a head like a bucket. But one is slightly more palatable than the other. You get my drift?
Absolutely.
Does that answer your question, Kathy?
No, that definitely answers my question.
Yeah, I think critiques can be really helpful, you know, as Andrew said, is if they're providing meaningful, you know, feedback. And to that point about like not hurting people's feelings, you know, I came to that notion of being able to do a critique, or the importance of being able to explain why you did what you did, you know, from, well, I don't know, Mrs. Clark seems to have quite a presence today, because that's who turned me on to, you know, the cattle judging book, and which then kind of encouraged me to go seek out an actual, you know, event where cows are being judged, cattle being judged, goats are being judged, and being able to listen to people do these live on the fly critiques. And, you know, one of the things that I took from that was the importance of attending to virtue, right? And kind of starting there. You know, what does this animal present to me in virtues? And by going through that process, I found that, and it kind of sticks with me, even when I don't have to do a critique, I kind of mentally, that's the process. And maybe that would help breeders when they're evaluating their dogs, is, you know, to have that process in your head as you go through over the dog. I often talk about, you know, when I'm judging, I'm always looking for that dog that rings the most bells, meaning the most virtues are popping off in my brain, you know. And, you know, if you have a very clear idea in your head, a picture in your head of what you're looking for, and as you go over an animal, you're going to wait for those, you know, bells or whatever it is, voices in your head, or whatever the things are that you listen to, and that will help you, because there'll be a quantifiable experience there that's happening to you viscerally as you go through that, as you go over a dog. And I think when you get to these critiques, I think that's a really great exercise even for breeders, is to actually be able to talk about each animal and say, these are the things that I find to be virtues. These are the places that I would like to see something a bit different. I'd like to see more of this. I'd like to see less of that. You know, that kind of thing. And so you're trying to be objective in a subjective situation. How about that?
You know, one of the things that's interesting about both of you is that you are confident judges. As you said, you know what you're doing, and you know exactly why you do what you're doing. How Andrew, you do a lot of teaching. How do you build confidence in judges so they're comfortable doing what they should do when they're doing their education versus page 53 in Dog News?
Yeah, okay. I think that, okay. How long is this webinar going to last? Because I think I'm going to take up the next 40 minutes.
The shortened version.
Okay, proceed version. As a kind of a lead into that, let me just rewind a little bit to something that Donnie touched on earlier on about breeders, you know, sort of mentally critiquing things. I have, obviously, you know, I'm a dog person. I have a lot of doggy friends. 90% of my friends are doggy friends, for God's sake. So, you know, over the years, I've had, you know, lots of opportunities where friends have said, look, I've got a litter. Will you please come up and have a look at the puppies? And I mean, nothing gives me greater pleasure than looking at puppies. I don't care what breed they are. You know, they need to be one of my breeds or any. I just adore looking at puppies, because if it's a breed that you're not familiar with, you can learn so much, you know, just watching them at the various stages of growth long before they get in the show ring. And it always used to amuse me, and this happened more with the sort of novice breeders. They'd invite you up to see them, and I never ever went to look at puppies unless they were a minimum of 6 weeks. You know, I had friends telephone me, and they would call up and say, I've got this litter, it's wonderful. And we have this dog puppy. He is just the spitting image of his father. I mean, he is so like Bonzo or whatever. And I said, how old are they? They're 3 weeks. I said, I mean, really, please do me a favor. I said, I will come up and I will look at them between 6 and 8 weeks. So you get there and there are the puppies and there is the grooming table. And the minute you arrive, before you've been offered a coffee, there is a puppy stacked on the table. I said, okay, forget that. Okay, make the coffee and put the whole litter out in the yard and let's sit down and just watch them mooch around. And we'll sit down and we'll have a coffee and we will look at the puppies. We'll look at them, how they relate to each other. We look at how they carry themselves. We look at who's the alpha dog, who's the one that cowers in the background. And then when we spend half an hour looking at puppies, I said, okay, now let's go to the grooming table. And I used to ask them to put each puppy on the table and verbally critique it, for me, nose to tail. And it was very interesting what would come out of that. And sometimes the breeder themselves surprised themselves with what they were finding, and maybe they had preconceived ideas. Okay, that was the lead in. How do you train people to have confidence? Well, first of all, they have to be absolutely certain of the breed and the breed standard. And not just the breed standard, they have to have read books on the breed. They have to fully understand where the breed is coming from. You know, the breed standard is just a selection of words that you can adapt to fit anything, basically. You know, if you just arrived from the planet Mars, I think one famous author said, you know, give them a breed standard and they'd all just draw a cow. But once somebody has the knowledge of a breed in the context of the standard, they should have the ability and the confidence to make educated decisions. The problem with judges training internationally, in my opinion, is that it's far too textbook. It's far too scientific. Nobody actually talks to these people as if they are human beings with human frailties and human emotions. And you have to be in a position where you can walk in the center of the ring and say, in my opinion, that is the best dog. It is with a person I have never seen. It has no show record to my knowledge. However, this is Mr. XYZ famous handler. This dog I know was 120 best in show. This one I know is by my best friend Stud Dog. However, this dog I think is the best, and be able to put it up in the prime position and give it the award it deserves. And the other side of this coin is, of course, that depth of knowledge should give you the ability to walk into a ring working with this mental template that you've developed in your formative years and say, okay, I have a class of 8 dogs here. 7 look like that. 1 looks like that. But you know, the 1 is correct and the other 7 are rather offbeat. Now they have to have the confidence and the courage to say, okay, it's in the minority, it's the 1 on its own, but that's the correct one, and not make the mistake that a lot of weaker-willed judges make and say, well, 7 of them look like that, so the majority have to be right, and the correct dog ends up walking out of the ring. And you know, you have to, the building of confidence. Hans Lichten, the much revered Finnish all-rounder, said to me once, you know, Andrew, the difference between confidence and arrogance is as thin as a piece of cotton. But he said, if you're going to do justice to the job, you have to have the confidence to do what you think is right, regardless. And it is something that can be self-taught. You know, I mean, one of these funny little things I used to tell them at seminars, and they used to look at me very, very strangely. I said, okay, if a dog walks in the ring and you absolutely hate it, imagine it's being shown by your best friend. Have you suddenly noticed some kind of redeeming feature? Now, you've got this dog that comes in, you think it's absolutely wonderful. Imagine it's being shown by your worst enemy. Is it still as wonderful? Or have you noticed a few little blemishes? And these silly little sort of, you know, mental exercises can actually help you, you know, with the whole judging process and help you to make completely impartial but informed decisions.
I think that's very good. I just sent a question to Donald, which sort of takes us back, but I think it's an important question because it's also how people ringside judge.
Mm-hmm. The question about being fault focused. Yes. I think that speaks to where I was coming from before. I think and I do think that this is a problem. It goes back to that issue of mediocrity. I think it goes to an issue of not being able to understand the whole, you know, the gestalt of the situation. So if you're looking at dogs and you're dismissing dogs because you're identifying their faults, or you go down the line and go, well, that dog's got an awful front and that dog's got an awful rear and that dog doesn't have this and this dog doesn't have that.
You're left with nothing.
You're left with nothing. The dog who's left standing there is the dog who may be without significant fault, but also without any significant virtue, which is of no use to me. I've got lovely, non-faulty, you know, mixed breeds trotting down the street right now outside my apartment in Brooklyn, and I covet their soundness and how they move, but they have no virtue to offer from a breeding perspective, right? They have no breed-specific qualities, and so I think that's the danger there. And I think that's a danger for breeders when they dismiss dogs, right? We all do it. We've all sat outside the ring. We've got a dog in there competing, and who doesn't want to win? We didn't go there to lose, right? We all went to win, and to salve ourselves, you know, because of a loss, we find things we don't like, or why that dog that beat us shouldn't have beat us, right? What's wrong with them? As opposed to the opposite conversation should be, why does that dog keep beating me? What is it about that dog? What are his qualities or her qualities? What are the virtues? What do they possess that people are valuing that my dog does not appear to have? That's one place to start. We can go off and talk about what if the judges are choosing a dog that's completely wrong, but that's a different conversation. Let's stick with the danger of fault judging and not being honest about, you know, one's own animals. That someone had, you know, said to me once, I think it was Max Magder, Canadian judge. He had judged this beautiful greyhound bitch in Europe someplace. And he showed me a picture of her, and he was talking about how, you know, stunning she was, and she was in this photo. I mean, she's stunning. And but her foot could have been better. It was, and he said, you know, somebody came up to him and said, how could you possibly have put up that bitch with that foot? And he said, you know what? I agree with you. And didn't she carry that flaw beautifully? There are some dogs that have such greatness that they can carry those flaws. They can carry those faults. What's important is the breeder, the person who's now going to work with that bitch, right? Be honest with themselves about, she's beautiful and she's great, but I just got to remember there's a piece here that could be better, right? There's not perfection here. And I think that's important for all of us to sometimes take a step back and say, you know, there are some animals who have things that we would like to be different about them, but they carry it extremely well. And that goes to what I was talking about earlier. When you have a great animal, when you have greatness, they can carry a flaw or two quite beautifully. You know?
Well, I think, wasn't it B. Godsall that passed that little pearl on to Mr. Sabella when she said, you know, all great dogs have faults, but they just carry them beautifully.
Yes.
It's, and that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Pat, do you think this is a good time? We have a question about what is primarily a hunting dog, and I wonder if that's a cue to look at some of the dogs. and then come back to that question and be able to.
I love that question, actually. I love that question.
I know. Do you want to answer it before we look at dogs?
Well, it's where our standard starts, right? It's in the general appearance section.
Right.
And I think that's a cue as we go to look at these pictures. I'm gonna let people do some homework. When we say primarily a hunting dog, what does that mean? What does that evoke? But also, what is the golden retriever as a hunting dog? What was its task? Each of the retriever breeds were developed for different reasons and did different jobs in lots of different places. And the golden retriever is very specific in that way. You need to know that and understand that to come back and look at the breed as part of the retriever family and why it is built the way it's built, or why it has the temperament it has, and so on. So I'm going to leave that as a little homework, and we can come back to it.
Well, are you going to ask Donnie to expand on the perception of a hunting breed before we analyze these pictures?
I'm going to let the two of you just do what you will with these photographs.
Okay. So are you going to say a few words about, you know, your explanation of a hunting breed, Don?
I think what's important to remember about the golden retriever is it was mainly a nobleman's pickup dog. Right? The Chesapeake was a market hunter. It was out there with somebody who was making a living, working in harsh conditions, hardworking, long days, going out and bringing back as many birds as it could possibly bring in a day. That's a different dog than the dog who's out for the day on a shoot, who's often, their main job is usually finding the bird that wandered off the mark because they weren't hit accurately, which is why they wanted good scenting ability to find those birds that kind of moved from the fall. But then could also come back and join the family for the picnic and hang out and be comfortable and docile. That's very different from a market hunter like a Chesapeake. It's very different from the field trial dogs that the Labradors became, right? The golden retrievers were never meant to be either of those types of hunting dogs. And so when you put them in the context of that kind of retriever, that kind of hunter, that's something that has always concerned me when we talk about our Goldens as a versatile breed, and that I do believe they're versatile and that they can pretty much do anything we ask them to do. But I honestly believe they really shouldn't be stars at much of the things we try to do with them. Like their temperament and their build should not make them stars in field trials the way that they're done now, competitive field trials. They shouldn't be stars in agility the way it's done now, right? They shouldn't, but people who find themselves kind of in very performance oriented start to choose for confirmation that plays to those choices. I think we have to come back and remember they're primarily a hunting dog and what kind of hunting dog they are. And from a confirmation point of view, not get pulled off in those directions of all of the versatility and performance items. Those dogs start to muddy the water for us, I think.
Would either one of you like to explain why the confirmation of the golden makes it such a versatile dog?
I think that you get to that the moderate nature of its construction should make it athletic enough to do most things, but the body substance and the bone and the temperament and character should not make it a dog that should be great at high speed events. Does that make sense?
Certainly does.
They should be able to do it. I just don't think they should be rock stars at it. And I look at this photo of this dog and I see a very balanced, moderate animal. I was trying to contain myself because the first thing I see is that coat. I can, without even touching it, I know that coat texture is going to feel sublime. When you check for coat texture, check on the back, over the loin, over the rump. That's where it'll be its truest and most gorgeous. And I can see by the way it waves and wraps around the body that it's got to be exquisite. I love the depth and the ribbing on this dog. I love the width of the thigh and the width of the shoulder. When I look at that, when we talk about dividing a dog up, a golden retriever up into those thirds, I think this dog fits that concept of being able to, I wish I could draw a line, but you could divide this photo into thirds, and there's that width of shoulder and width of thigh and the body in the middle with that really deep rib cage, right? There's not a lot of tuck up there. with a well-muscled loin. If I had my druthers, and I don't know, right? It's a photo. I'd love to see this dog step forward and go in motion. I'm going to imagine that this dog probably carries itself quite well. You know, the front is set a little forward in this photo. We can't determine, but if I had my druthers, I'd have a little more return of upper arm so that the front was set under it. And I can't really tell from the photo how much of it's structure and how much of it's set. When I look at the head and profile, I love the fact that I see a rounded skull. I see an equal proportion of muzzle to skull. I see a lovely stop. I see what appears to be a lovely shape and color of eye. I might like a little more depth of muzzle, a little stronger underjaw from this picture. Yeah, to me, I could see this golden retriever in the ring today, and be quite pleased, actually.
Can I come in there, Don?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I put this picture in was basically, I mean, I'd sort of grown up going to little, you know, evening limited shows and then, you know, weekend open shows in South Wales. I'd seen the sort of local golden retrievers and got sort of interested because there was a very, very nice family, the Pritchard family, that had two very young daughters who have now got children of their own, of course. But they had a golden male and a golden female. The dog was called Coilan Grenadier. The bitch was called Medarine Deleth. And they won sort of, you know, regularly at these little shows. And they were really, you know, to my eye, they were really nice dogs and really nice people. We became good friends. And then at one of the championship shows in the south of England, round about 1970, I remember watching the Gundog group and seeing this golden retriever bitch come into the ring. And I honestly can't tell you who was handling it, whether it was a gentleman, whether it was a lady. It was certainly nobody famous. And I just remember seeing this bitch come into the ring on a completely loose lead and going around with this freedom and courage. And I mean, she gave me goosebumps. I'm getting goosebumps now, you know, sort of 50 years down the line, just remembering it. And I just thought, she is so, so beautiful. But, you know, when, I don't know whether it was Sabella or whoever, somebody once told me that the mark of a great dog was that you are immediately attracted to the whole. You don't say, oh my God, that dog's got a wonderful head, or, oh, look at that dog's hindquarters, or hasn't that dog got a fabulous coat? The whole thing attracts you. And this bitch made such a huge impression on me. And, you know, Donnie's point about her standing slightly forward on the front, it is the way she's set up. Because, I mean, she was so beautifully constructed, you know, moderate in the extreme, with not a hint of mediocrity. Yeah, I mean, she made a huge impression. And you were so right about what you said about the coat. I mean, it's just absolutely glorious. But she was the one that made me sit up and think, God, you know, golden retrievers can be sort of on that level. I thought she was a marvelous, marvelous bitch.
You know, I like your point about being drawn in completely, and I think that's, you know, that's the gestalt I was talking about, right? Being able to take the whole picture. But as judges, we also have to go in, right? We got to go in. We got to look at the points. We got to look at pieces. But then we've also got to be able to come back out and take it all back in again and kind of weigh those virtues and flaws. And I think, you know, this bitch, you know, to me, I mean, I would love to have her now. I would walk in the ring with her now. One of the things that, you know, even from a shape point of view, there's a roundness to her. There's a roundness to her body shape, a roundness to her lines, a flow.
But you see, without touching her, looking at that picture, you can feel the spring of rib.
Yes, exactly. Like, I know that it goes this way. And the arch of the neck, which is really important. When you put your hand on a dog's neck, there should be muscle and an arch there. It shouldn't be narrow, weak, or like a stovepipe. And so I think she'd be lovely to have right now.
If you gentlemen are through just go about this dog, may I move on to the next one?
Sure.
You're in charge.
Yeah, but see now the bar is set high. Like, don't bring me down, Kathy. Don't bring me down.
I don't think I'm going to be doing that.
Okay, good.
Are we looking at cameras, Christopher?
I don't see a picture.
Nope.
Ah, that is not good. Let me go back. Okay. Do we see him now?
Nope.
No.
Okay, then I am going to do something different because I was prepared for disaster.
Not disaster, just a blip.
Blip.
Mine a blip.
Okay, so we will. look at-
Somebody's giving you directions in the messages.
Love that. The village is helping.
I can't see the village while I'm doing this. Can we now see cameras, Christopher, or not?
No, there are no
Not
photos.
yet.
Okay, then.
Tell you what, while Kathy is searching,
Yes.
would each of you gentlemen expound on the fact that judges and breeders seem very confused about styles in Goldens? I once had a conversation with a judge that said they found judging Goldens so difficult because they all look so different.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say to someone that might ask you that question? Andrew, do you want to start that, or?
Well, I think, as with a lot of breeds, you will have different styles. I mean, a lot of people talk about different types. It's not an expression I would use. I mean, your use of the word style is far more applicable. As far as your breed is concerned, of course, the absolute judge's nightmare is going to a country where you have a very distinct mix of, dare I use the expression, American type and European type. And I mean, that can be extremely difficult. And I mean, it happened to me on a number of occasions, notably in Asia, where you have, two distinct styles of dog. Mm-hmm. And a couple sort of somewhere in the middle. And it's not easy, but you have to try to, as best you can, judge to type. It's not always easy, but you can, as I think Don said earlier on, you can only work with what's in front of you.
I think
what's in front of you now should be Christopher?
Yes, he is.
Christopher is with us. In a small screen behind a very animated conversation that's gone on with someone, I think. Somebody mentioned that Kathy had stopped screen sharing, whatever that means.
How is he looking better now?
Yes, that's perfect.
He's enlarging. Yeah. I mean, he was Don. You saw Christopher, presumably.
No, not in person.
Not in person. I mean, he was a phenomenal dog in the show ring, because he had such incredible ring presence and personality, and was a great moving dog. And of course, as you will be well aware, I mean, over years has proved this incredible stud force. With I don't know whether there is still actually semen in existence, but I mean, he was siring for just generations and generations and generations. And funnily enough, when I did that interview with Mrs. Tudor for the Midland Club, she freely admitted that in her opinion he did not have what she referred to as a classical head. I mean, to my eye, I never found the head offensive, but Joan felt that his head could have been more beautiful. But he was, he was a complete package kind of dog. And of course, his legacy to the breed has been that he's been this, just incredible stud force.
this bitch has actually been in my brain for a very long time.
I think she's been in all our brain.
This is pretty close to the template that's in my head.
Yeah.
So everybody knows it. Yeah, I mean that's pretty close to perfect. She's so feminine, you know, but still possesses, you know, bone and substance and shape. She's not unlike the first bitch in proportion and making shape. For me, I prefer her head a bit more than the first bitch because of the depth of muzzle.
Yeah,
but I think that her overall make and shape, I have the same reaction. She's so beautiful in her flow of neck and to shoulder. Like everything is unbroken lines, like flowing from the tip of her nose to the tip of her tail. Like everything just flows and yeah, this is a beautiful bitch. Again, that feeling of roundness, right? A round rib, a round butt, you know, that broadness of thigh, broadness in the shoulder blade, gorgeous, strong neck with an arc.
I think, you know, the sort of outline, the angles, you know, the basic proportions, everything is so pleasing. And I think I'd be right in saying that this is also one of Henrik's favorites. I'm pretty sure he's mentioned her glowingly in the past.
Yeah.
She's beautiful.
There's that phrase, fills your eye. She fills your eye.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And annoyingly, she filled the frame so much that photograph actually seemed to dock her tail a little bit, which was so annoying. And I never got to see an equally good photograph of her with the full tail in. But it doesn't detract from the bitch in any shape or form.
Not at all. Andrew, you said that Mrs. Clark would not have used this photo because his feet
no, we were joking before we went on air, and I said, regardless of this dog's virtues, it would never have got past Mrs. Clark, because when we were working on the International Encyclopedia, we must have, and it was before the days of email, we were sending pictures to and fro across the Atlantic, thousands of pictures. And I learned very early on that if I ever sent a photograph to Mrs. Clark, no matter how beautiful it was otherwise, if you could not see the entire foot, Annie just chucked it on the cutting room floor. I mean, it was not up for discussion. So poor Whirlwind, I'm afraid he would not have made Mrs. Clark's book. Sorry, Whirlwind.
But not for lack of quality, just the
absolutely
lack of ability to see his feet. But you know, feet are very important. Feet are like the tires on the car. You know, Mrs. Clark is not completely wrong. I know she was from a more of an aesthetic point of view and an instructional point of view, but in actuality, when we're assessing dogs, you know, feet are extremely important, especially for a hunting dog. And, you know, they need to be, you know, tight and well padded. And, you know, that's something that we want to pay attention to.
But, you know, in the generation of Facebook, Don, it still astounds me the number of people who use photographs of dogs standing in grass, and much longer grass than Whirlwind is.
Yeah.
And they seem completely incapable of appreciating that has thrown the dog out completely out of balance.
The proportion, right? When you try to look at the proportion on the dog, right? You can't really appreciate that as well as you
could. I get either of you to comment on, is this enough coat for me as a breeder to show my dog? And is this enough coat for a judge to
Good God, yes, absolutely.
It's not, to me, it's not about amount, it's about texture. You know, as long as the texture is correct and it, you know, it's a double coat and it lays to the body, like that's what matters to me. You know, all the furnishings, you know, some people will complain like, oh, you know, that dog's got too many furnishings. It's not the amount that bothers me, it's the texture. The dog could carry a lot of furnishings as long as the texture is harsh enough, that hair will break, you know, when it's working in the field. So this dog to me is in beautiful coat. That's to me perfect.
Because can I be a complete moron here and ask why did you actually query the coat, Kathy?
Because I will often hear breeders say, well, I would like to show so-and-so, but he doesn't have enough coat.
You see, the coat.
And I question that because I think this is lovely. I would love to see this in a ring.
Well, is it a question of amount of coat or being in coat? Because a dog could be out of coat and not be carrying a good jacket, right? Be devoid of undercoat and not be in his best, top coat. And so somebody may choose to say, my dog's not in his best coat right now, which is different from saying not enough coat, right?
Right, absolutely.
You see, the coat never occurred to me at all.
No, me neither.
One of the most influential dogs in our breed in the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm. This dog is significant for a number of reasons. I think, one of the things that has not come up yet, and I wish I wasn't the one bringing it up because it always drives me nuts when this does come up, but it's one of the first things people ask me when they start wanting to judge the breed, and it has to do with color. Right. And they often focus on the other end of the spectrum, right? They're like, well, what about those really, cream dogs, those really white dogs, those blonde dogs, and now here we have, Haagen-Dazs, who is on the other end of the spectrum, right? A much darker, colored dog. And I would say to any of you out there, whether you're a judge or a breeder, you should be very grateful if you find yourself in a situation where your deciding factor is color. There are so many other things. This breed comes in such a range of colors that are acceptable. There are so many other things to take into account and so many other things to value and that are important. I would love, I've been doing this a long time and I've never yet had a situation where I came down and I had two equally beautiful dogs and I had to say, well, which one's the better color? It just never happens. So put that out of your head. They're golden retrievers, the range of colors, they're all fine. Move on. This dog, to me, I did judge this dog and had my hands on this dog. And what impressed about this dog was his athleticism, his construction and his athleticism. He came along at a time, when some of the Goldens had gotten a bit fancy and less athletic looking, more plush kind of looking animals as opposed to athletic and retriever hunting like, right? And so he came along at a good time to kind of help swing the pendulum back, right? He was a really well-made dog. He was great in motion. He was great to the hand. And I think, in this picture, you see that what he does for me is I love his front construction, his layback of shoulder, and his length and return of upper arm. I feel like that's what contributed to his, his beautiful, gait. But you can start to get too much of, on both ends, too much angle and too much length, and dogs that start to flatten and open up too much when they go. And I feel like this dog kind of opened the door to, these, really athletic, bigger moving dogs, but then people got carried away with, okay, well, if a lot is good, then more is better. And that's not the case with anything. I found this dog to be very pleasing, to my eye. And when I look at him in comparison to, say, the two bitches that, we just looked at, it's interesting because Henrik and I have had conversations about both the bitch and this dog. And interestingly, both Henrik and I find both of these animals, although slightly different, to be very dogs of quality, very admirable, good representatives of the golden retriever. Can
I ask you a question about this dog, Doug?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's going to sound now like I'm falling into the trap of fault judging, which is something that we've just completely criticized.
But go ahead.
It's something that intrigues me, and I've noticed it in a number of dogs, not exclusively in America, and not exclusively in golden retrievers. In the when we're looking at hindquarters, mm-hmm. I find that you get a number of dogs that, whilst you can't say that they're sickle-hocked because they aren't, but when they set up, the construction of the rear pastern is such that the nails on the back foot don't actually touch the ground. There's that slight lift off the rear pad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you had any theories about that, because this dog is sort of bordering on it.
And that was my, you know, I'm being tactful. Like I think he's pushing, right? He's there. And so
Right.
you know, from a breeding point, which a lot of great dogs, that's exactly the point, right? They take us to that limit, right? You know, and because there's just so much there. This dog, like if I would trim his hock differently, that's become fashion for us. That angle to the trim of the hock doesn't help. It accentuates and makes it look like something it's not. And I think the effort there was to try to make it look like there's more sweep, when in actuality he has plenty of sweep. Like you don't want any more. You don't want any more length of second thigh. You don't, you know, so I think that's where I would say, okay, this is, for me, my eye is going, okay, not more than that. I can appreciate him, you know, I like this dog a lot, and I've done, you know, had done well for this dog as a judge, and have liked, you know, a number of his offspring as well. But I would say that that's something we do want to be mindful of, right? When we start to talk about extremes, that's where length will start to show itself, right? If you start to get length anywhere, you're going to get length other places. Right. So be mindful of that. That's just how nature works. If you start to lengthen one part, other things get longer.
It's just this, as I said, condition that does crop up, you know, so often these days, of these dogs that, as I said, they are not sickle hocked as such, but they just don't rest the rear pads completely.
And I think putting it in context, in actuality, at the time.
And of course, this dog is on a rostrum, which doesn't help.
Yes, and I would say putting it in the context of the breed at the time, this dog was actually swinging the pendulum back in the right direction. There were dogs that were much more stylized and much more extreme at the time, and he was helping to kind of swing it back a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I totally see that.
Andrew, this was one of your choices?
Yeah, this is one of my choices, and I was so glad that it was, because in the background is our beloved Ginny, who hopefully is going to be watching tonight, because Virginia Line was judging in the adjacent ring. This was judging Golden's at
it looks like Eastern Dog Club in Boston. Maybe?
Boston's, is that Springfield?
Yeah.
Is that venue that gets used hundreds and hundreds of times?
Yes, it is.
Right. Okay. That's where it was. And this bitch came in the ring, and to be honest, I mean, I just did a double take, because I was not expecting to find that, and she just completely and utterly blew me away. And I just loved everything about her. And I thought, you could put this bitch in any country in the world and she would win best of breed, and no one would have the slightest idea where she came from or how she was bred.
How old was she here? Do you know?
I think she was round about 2 years old. I think she was a recent sort of, she might have been a move up, or I think she was probably coming up to 2.
What I had a similar reaction to her for proportion. I like her make and shape. I love the amount of bone she possesses for her size and her substance. And her head properties, again, the rounded skull. You know, it's hard for me to see in this photo, but when we look at golden heads, you know, one of the things that I get concerned about, you know, currently is a lack of work in the head. And what that means is, for lack of a better word, the chiseling, you know, the way a head breaks up and the details in the head. And I feel like we're getting a lot of Goldens that look more like plush toys, like stuffed animals, and everything is kind of fluffy and smooth. And so I think, you know, those earlier bitches gave me a little bit of that, right? The work in the headpiece that, you know, that we like to see, you know, in excellence. And what I saw when I did that national recently was, I think that's something people are struggling with, is understanding it, because I saw those that were devoid of it. And then I also saw those where there was too much. There was too much fall away under the eye and hollowing and veininess. And that's not it. That's too much. So that's something we could probably work on a little bit is the detail.
You can keep talking about the head, Donald.
Well, I think that's, that's really the key, right? Is looking at, proportions, right? It should be a broad skull. It should be a rounded skull as opposed to the flat skull of a Labrador. It should be, a muzzle that tapers slightly, but it really should give an impression of being full, right? And deep. There should be, a slight stop, the set and size of the ear. And then of course the shape and the set and the color of the eye. There should be nothing sharp. We go back right where we were when we started. We're talking about expression. It's all in those eyes and how they set in the head.
And I think you can see some of the chiseling on here a little bit.
Yes.
And again, another very important dog for us. Not the best angle to actually look at fronts, but a great producer. And
where my eye goes here is because of the angle of the photo, the front, the forechest is so prominent. And I think, that's something where, you need to get your hands on a dog, right? I want to confirm that what my eye is seeing, right? My impression is that this dog has, sufficient forechest. I would want to get my hand there and feel, and I'm not just feeling for that breastbone, right? That point. I'm looking for the musculature that goes along with that fills the front. And my instinct is telling me, but my eye is telling me that I think when I put my hands there, I'm going to feel that fill because of the way this photo presents it. But I wouldn't know that until I actually get my hands there.
Another Andrew choice.
Yeah, this was an Irish dog, and I'd never actually seen him in Ireland. The first time I saw him was actually in Scandinavia when Henrik had got hold of him. And again, he was one of those dogs that, just sort of caught your eye, held it. He was a remarkably free, agile, easy moving dog that had that, substance of the combination of substance and quality. And Don would know better than myself, but I think I'm right in saying that he became quite a significant stud dog.
Yeah, for Henrik, yes.
Yeah.
I think that idea of what a golden looks like in motion, right? It's Andrew has used words like, an easy way of going. They really should be light of foot. It should be balanced. There's a foot timing there that's free and easy. There's not a lot of wasted motion. And, sometimes, you'll hear people, raving and talking about, look at the reach and drive on that golden, or look at the powerful gait on that golden. Those are words that would never come out of my mouth talking about a golden retriever. It should be light and easy and effortless. And it looks like it should go all day. And it should look like the same dog in motion as it is standing. Like this, when we look at this dog, I would envision him dropping his head slightly forward and his front leg reaching out and his rear leg extending out just enough to cover ground evenly and easily. But he should maintain that same profile when he's moving.
Yeah.
They should be two different dogs standing and in motion. And I would imagine, he does. And this is the more extreme you get in any piece, the less likely you are to have that same dog in motion. You see,
I always think of Goldens as having a certain effortless quality about them, and moving in a style that's completely different from German Shepherds and more sort of dogs that have determination, if you want.
Yes.
Because there's just a sort of freedom about their movement, and yet it still has power and scope.
Yes. Its strength should be in its its stamina to keep doing that, right? It should be able to just do that all day. And that's all part of construction. It has to do with the angles and the balance on both ends. It also has to do with the back, right? Is this dog constructed in a way in which the neck and shoulder fit and the back is supported by a rib cage, right? And that's why we ask for that shorter loin, because you want the length to be in that rib cage. It's what supports the spine, right? It's like if you're building a house and you have the studs, they're holding up that ceiling, the back, the top line. That's essential in a sporting dog. A strong, solid back, essential in all the sporting dogs. This bitch, I like this bitch for the fact that she is very balanced and very moderate. I like her head properties. It's hard. I wonder if she's in her best coat, right? It's not so much the amount, it's
How old is this bitch in this photograph?
3, maybe. I'm guessing.
Okay.
3.
yeah. She's a lovely bitch. I might, in comparison to the 2 bitches ahead of her earlier in the pictures, she's not quite as mature in body and rib cage as the 2 bitches we looked at earlier on. But when you think about it, bring us back to the span of time, right? We looked at some bitches from decades ago, and now we're looking at this bitch, and we're still seeing a similar make and shape. We saw it in the young bitch in Boston that Andrew had chosen. There's that similar proportions, right? Just off square, moderate angles that are balanced on both ends, a nice amount of bone, to go with the body substance. There's that rounded skull, a square muzzle. They all have these essential features that become, the essence of a golden retriever when you put them all together.
Sorry, Kathy, can you just go back to her? Does it make any sense at all when I look at this picture and I would be inclined to say to the owner, this bitch is going to look so much better after a litter?
Yeah, to me, it looks like maturity, right? That's what I was going to say. I like the maturity that the photos of the other 2 bitches presented. I would say that
totally.
As she matures, will carry a little bit more rib and body.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Yeah, January Master. He was an interesting dog. I first judged him in an any variety stakes class at 3 counties in 2013. So he would have been a 6-year-old dog then, and he won the open stakes class. Then I judged him in the breed later in the year in Belfast, and he won the reserve CC under me behind an Irish dog. And then I think it was something like 3 years later, he came back. So he would have been, fundamentally a veteran when I judged the breed at Birmingham National. And I actually gave him the CC in best of breed, and he was then about 7.5. And he was what I mean, as my biggest criticism of the UK Goldens is the fact that movement is not always the breed's strong point, particularly behind. But I mean, this dog, he was such a wonderfully true mover. He opened up beautifully in profile. He was really good out and back. And he actually did some quite serious group placing which had become, long after Christopher's day. But, it is very, very rare that we see Goldens place in the Gundog group, because, a lot of the group judges have formed the opinion that they can't move. And in a lot of cases, that unfortunately is justified. But he was a wonderful moving, good all-round dog, in my opinion. I don't know what Don would have made of him.
Cool.
Well, he would have loved the coat.
The coat texture is stunning. I think I appreciate the fact that he's, and this is a photo of an older dog. I very much appreciate, his head properties, his arch of neck. He looks like he has a powerful front end, and well made. I think what's throwing me is he seems so powerfully made up front and not, and somewhat slighter in the second thigh into the rear pastern. So my eye keeps getting thrown off a little bit, especially after looking at some of the previous pictures where the balance was, nearly perfect, right? Dog after dog after dog.
I think not making excuses for the dog, but I think if you actually look closely at the picture, there is an element of shadowing on that lower second thigh, which makes it look rather sort of weak. But having judged him on 3 occasions, I can say that one of his outstanding features was actually his strength behind. So I think
make him very valuable. Would make him very valuable, in England, because as you say, that has been a struggle, and I think part of it, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert there. When I have been there does seem to be a greater emphasis across the board on kind of standing back and looking at the dogs standing, and not as much time put into watching the dogs in motion. So it seems from the outside observer that we put a lot much more emphasis on movement here, which sometimes to the detriment of some type features.
Well, I always remember, and I mean it wasn't a comment that was addressed directly to Goldens, but the same would apply. The very first time I went to a Labrador specialty, I had the good fortune to be reasonably friendly with Gwen Broadley, who had the Sandy Lens Labradors and was, in my estimation, one of the greatest breeders and one of the greatest judges the world has ever known. And I sat with her at this Labrador specialty from minor puppy dog through to open bitch, and just asked her about the dogs. And it was the first time I'd seen Labradors in any great depth. And I was just horrified at how badly they moved. And Gwen, who, was the most charming of people and never really said anything bad about anything or anyone, just said, "But my dear, you have to understand that to the average Labrador person, good movement means actually getting across the ring and back, wagging its tail." And I think that in some instances, some of our golden people probably have the same kind of feeling.
Yeah, I would agree.
Again, this is one of Andrew's dogs. I assume that you also have seen this dog, Donald?
Yes. I think it's interesting watching the time progression here, because you're starting to see that this is a bit more fancy. There's a bit more sweep here than some of the previous dogs we looked at, which is probably more in line. Like this could walk in the ring. This dog could walk in the ring here, and people probably wouldn't think otherwise. If she had just a scotch more color to her coat, she would fit right in. Actually, I think.
I mean, this was a bitch of I don't know whether Henrik actually owned her or who handled her. I honestly can't remember, or whether maybe she had handled her. Anyhow, she's certainly bred by Henrik. She was my best breed in 2011, and she actually became a champion on that day. And there were quite a few due mists in the entry that day, and it was a very good entry numerically. And I also had a student judge who was one of the partners in the very famous Almanza Flatcoat kennel.
Oh.
But she just filled my eye completely. How would she? I know you just skirted her own color there, Don. If you were to throw her in a ring in the States now, how would she go down color wise?
I think some judges would not have the confidence you spoke about earlier until they had a conversation where they were told, don't get so caught up in that. I think that, this is a lovely bitch. She's a, beautiful head and eye. lovely arch of neck. She's got a gorgeous front end. You know, again, I'd want to get my hands on there, but my eye is telling me there's forechasts there. You know, there's layback of shoulder. There's a return of upper arm. She's got sufficient bone. She's got that round, I can tell, right? It's a rounded rib, a deep body, a nice broad thigh. I love how her tail comes off her croup, right? It's not a flat croup. It's just slightly rounded. Right. Yeah, it's just perfect.
But you see, to me, it's 25 years down the road. Mm-hmm. That to me is a similar stamp to Susilla.
Yes,
the style bitch that we admired earlier.
Yeah, I think, you know, for my eye, I think she's beautiful. She starts, I think, just in trying to use this from an educational point of view, I think you start to see that even there, right, in another country, they're starting to see the impact of choosing for something a little fancier. Like if we put Susilla next to her, Susilla is more moderate in all her elements, whereas this bitch gets a little fancier. And I love them both. Like I would take that home in a heartbeat.
Right.
This dog to me, when I think of that word, that phrase, that primarily a hunting dog, like I think not just because he's standing in a field, but he conveys that essence, much like the whirlwind dog does, right? They're not fancy. They're a very moderate, functional looking dog. You know, and that's their beauty. Their beauty is in their moderation. There's nothing mediocre about either one of them.
I think this dog has enormous appeal.
Yeah,
there's just so much to love about him as far as elements of breed type, but somehow there is albeit in a very rugged surroundings, the dog has charisma.
Yes, but this again, like this dog walking in the ring would require a judge to understand that, because next to him are going to be dogs that are going to have long necks and sweep behind and blown out coats and so on. And
how could you possibly want more neck than that?
Because the dog standing behind it will have more, is what I'm saying, is that a judge confronted with a dog with, you know, more neck and more sweep and more hair and more coat and probably, you know, bigger open gait, you know, that they need to know, no, that may be eye-catching, but that's not correct, right? That my
I know nothing about this dog, Don. Was this a significant dog in the States from a producing standpoint, or what?
Someone else can speak to that.
I think he's been a good producer.
Right.
He has been, for his owner, who is also a judge and a breeder, owner, handler, he has been a fabulous hunting dog.
Right.
To an owner who is not a hunter.
I love that.
So he's just been a fabulous dog, and I would say he's, Pat, help me out here. I would say that he's admired by many of us.
But he's so beautifully put together.
Yes, which probably makes him a really good hunting dog.
Yeah.
So
well, it would make him functional, right? He would be able to do his job for the day.
This would be primarily hunting dog.
But he fills your eye as a golden retriever.
Yes, absolutely.
Look at that photo. See, to me, my eye doesn't get dragged anywhere on this dog.
No.
You know, it just kind of stays in the gestalt.
And he is not having his tail pushed to the heavens.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful photograph.
Andrew, you put this one in.
Yeah, I did. This was a puppy. She was approaching 9 months, I think, at the time. I judged her in Portugal, and had I been judging under the UK system, I loved her so much that she would actually have been my best bitch. But because she was under 9 months, obviously with their system, you're not allowed to do that. They have to just stop at best puppy. I absolutely loved everything about her. It turned out that she was actually bred in Norway, and her sire, I think it was actually had come over and been best of breed at Crufts in, I think it was 2010. And one of the sort of humorous aspects of this particular picture was I loved the make and shape and the head on this bitch so much that I was desperate to get a really good photograph. And the gentleman who handled her persisted in feeding her liver, and I was just absolutely going crazy. I came close to losing my temper and had a lady stewarding for me who was also a very good friend. And I said, for God's sake, take that liver away from him. And I said to the guy, you know, your bitch has such a beautiful head and expression. You know, why would you want to disguise it by feeding her constantly? Please give the liver to the steward. And the steward took the liver, walked away, click, one photo, there you are. Loved her. Did you like her, Donnie?
Yes,
That's
very much so, especially as a 9-month-old puppy. You know, she has so much to offer, and I do love her head. I think she's
Her head is,
yeah.
And yeah, well, not quite a puppy, but a little bit older. This was I was judging the breed in 2017 at Birmingham National, which was a very sort of it was an emotional appointment, really, because I know that the appointment had been secured by a lady called Mariel Hathaway, who some of you may have known or heard of, who was a dear friend of mine, who had sadly died after the appointment had been confirmed. So it was kind of very emotional. And I had in two of the young bitch classes, I think it was junior and yearling or something, this beautiful bitch came in with this young lady who I'd never seen before, and I just absolutely loved her. And she won her 2 classes. She came very close to winning the CC. You can see from the picture, she's young. She was 13 months at the time. So you can see she needed to sort of fill in that middle bit.
Yep.
But, you know, it really was so close for the CC. And when we were speaking afterwards, you know, I detected an accent with the lady. And apparently, she had traveled from Belgium, and the only reason that she'd come to Birmingham was because a very good girlfriend of hers had a Labrador that they were desperate to qualify for Crufts, and they needed someone to travel with them. So this lady decided to sling in a golden retriever bitch and enter it in 2 classes, and ends up with the reserve CC. And she still has, I think she's actually won a couple of CCs subsequently. But I thought she was absolutely delightful. I mean, I loved everything about her, apart from that slight element of lack of maturity in the middle piece. Loved her.
I would agree with you. That's the only place I would change her, is, you know, to fill her out in her mid piece. One of the things that I think is important to note with these the dogs from Europe, they tend to trim the ruff. I don't know if anybody's picking up on that, but they tend to trim that front ruff down, which kind of takes away the opportunity to cover as much as we do by having a natural ruff. And you know, in this case, you see, you know, this, you know, beautiful headpiece, you know, gorgeous arch of neck flowing into the shoulder. You can literally see the shoulder construction in this photo, and you can see her shoulder blade, you can see her upper arm, the length of her upper arm in the return, which is near perfect, the balance, the top line, the tail set. You know, this is a great outline for a golden retriever. Yeah. And
before we lose that photograph, you know, Don, on that previous picture where I was being Mr. Picky and discussing this business about the rear pads where the nails don't quite touch the ground.
Yes.
I mean, this to me is a great example of the correct business going on there. I mean, she is she is standing, you know, completely, perfectly on 4 pads.
Yes, she is.
And that's coming from the construction of the, you know, the upper thigh and the second thigh. When you look at that second
Yeah,
thigh,
of course.
yeah, that's a place where
Yeah.
people have to, you know, pay attention, is the length and width of that second thigh and the way that it fits into that, you know, that hock joint in the rear pastern. It's a really nice
Yeah.
example of that.
Yeah.
Pat, as I look at this picture as a former handler, I don't know what you think, but I've wondered if it would be advantageous to let my leash drape like this to accentuate the front end on a good dog.
Well, we see that a lot in Labradors. I don't know so much about in Goldens.
I might start. This picture, everybody else just got one picture, but this woman happened to send me this morning, 5 minutes after I spoke with her, a picture of the dog moving, and I could not resist because it's form and function.
Hmm?
This is the same bitch, the same bitch standing and moving.
Yes.
I do. I think that, you know, that does capture it. That, you know, that's, you know, she's very balanced fore and aft. You know, she's obviously, you know, been out there doing that a while. Her tongue's out. She's been, you know, she's probably starting to fatigue a bit. But I think, you know, this bitch, you know, with a little, I would, you know, just give her a little bit of a little more head carriage, and then it would be perfect to me. Yeah, it's lovely.
As I have explained to Andrew and Don, this dog is in here because he's been measured numerous times, and he is exactly 12 to 11. It's also a very nice dog, but can you explain what this means to your eye?
Well, I think especially standing in the ring with those who are not within those proportions, this dog, you know, may look too short backed or may look almost square, right? Because when you think about, you know, that 12 to 11 ratio, it is just off square. And so if you think about square breeds, like I mentioned before, poodles, my eye is very attuned to it, you know, so it's a very slight difference. In this particular, you know, photo, and I think this is where, you know, and the way that we present dogs here, and we were talking about this earlier, Andrew had picked up on it as well, you know, this way in which we kind of crank the dogs up, right? Like we take the collar and we kind of lift and, you know, get them to pull their neck out. And as we're pulling their neck out, we're also causing them to appear typically to have a more upright front than they probably have. And I'm gonna gather that if she were to not do that and to kind of let the head set, you know, or naturally set, you know, his front end would probably settle in as well. And those are things to think about, like when you're presenting your dogs, which is why people should, you know, work in front of a mirror or do things on video to be able to watch and see what their dogs look like when they're doing what they do. It may feel great, but it may not look great. You have to think about, you know, what is the judge seeing? And so, you know, in my mind, I would probably be asking them to relax the collar a little bit. And I'd probably, you know, try to relax the dog and just kind of see it in its natural, or just let them stand on their own and see what they do, how they hold themselves on their own without all of the, you know, machinations of setting and cranking and so on. But this is a handsome dog.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I saw that photograph, the first thing that hit me was, my God, you know, why is it being strung up? You know, to create a picture of an incorrect front. And I mean, I just wonder what this dog would look like if it was allowed to stand freely, like the picture of the both barrels dog.
Yes.
I mean, that the posture and the head carriage would be totally different.
Correct.
The dog would look much more much more natural. I mean, this dog is being strung up, and it just looks like a sort of startled fawn. You know, it's being pulled back into its body. I mean, it's upsetting the entire natural center of gravity. And, you know, I can't believe that any handler will have followed Dr. Sturz's advice and actually done this, having seen what it looks like in a mirror.
Well,
But
my
again,
last,
but to
my-
her, to this person's, defense, that this is the typical presentation. Like, this, she's not alone in this.
She should become a trendsetter. Why follow the masses, for God's sake?
Correct.
Go out on your own. Make the best of your dog. You're not there to ape everybody else in the same class. You're there to make the best of your own dog.
Pat, you had started to say something?
well, to Andrew's comments about this dog being strung up, I found on my most recent judging assignment that there was so much handler error that I ended up telling my exhibitors to please just free stack the dog.
Yeah.
And the majority of them looked so much better when they stood on their own without any help from the handler. And you got to see where everything fit.
I mean, when, routinely, regardless of the breed, when I judge, I have to have the dog out and back and completely freestand with no manipulation at all. And, sometimes exhibitors who've not shown to you previously, when you say, stand free, they look at you like kind of strangely, like, where did you just arrive from? Because it's something that they've never actually practiced doing. And you see, the vast majority of dogs in a wide number of breeds, if they were actually allowed to show themselves free when they are basically well-constructed animals, if they, from babies, were given the opportunity to stand on a loose lead, they would have so much of a head start against the opposition when they got in the ring. The problem is, because present-day exhibitors have been so brainwashed, and there's this follow the leader kind of mentality.
Well, I'm glad this dog is stacked, if only for the reason that I put these lines in here. To Donald's point, some of us aren't as good as picturing the off square and the square. And I think this dog can look square, and I can tell you absolutely those lines are 12 to 11. And so we might want the dog to be stacked differently, but this is the proportion that our standard is asking for.
Kathy,
go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
I think that's a really important point. But are there more pictures after this, or is this the last one?
This is the last picture. Well, there's one last picture, but this is the last to look at, really.
Okay, because I hope that we'll be able to go back to look at some of those that really capture the template and the outline, because I think from the point of view of learning and adapting your eye, we all may have preferences of a little more of this or a little more of that, but the basic make and shape should be the same for us. And it would be important. There are some really beautiful pictures that capture that so nicely that it would be important, for people to walk away with those good templates in their brain.
I put this in because it hit me as I was putting this all together that we have 50 years worth of dogs here.
Yeah.
And I see some similarities and some differences here, but we have 50. This slideshow represents 50 years of some lovely dogs. And to your point, both Donald and Andrew, people will get who attended the webinar will have the opportunity to request this whole slideshow.
Oh, great.
Because I thought it was important for people to be able to keep these kinds of pictures in their mind, both breeders and judges.
Sure.
That, to me, this slideshow was intended to help people train your eye.
Yeah.
You see, I think the important thing, and I think what Donald said makes perfect sense. It's all about, if you're going to judge, if you're going to breed, you gain nothing from studying mediocrity. you can only you can only progress if you expose yourself to quality. And I get so furious when I read breed books in a variety of breeds, and there are photographs used to illustrate faults. I mean, whenever I've done breed books, I have always made a point of using photographs to illustrate virtues. And, I've never felt the need to point out what a fault is. And if it is something that is crucially important, then I would use a line drawing. But I can't see the point in letting the reader waste their time with their eye dwelling on something that is wrong. The eye needs to be spent looking at things that are right.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. For any education that goes forward, it needs to be virtue focused and virtue leads.
Absolutely.
So I think we, the two of you certainly thought this was fabulous.
I think, in looking at all of these dogs, I think what you want people to walk away from this with is being able to have a conversation maybe they couldn't have had before, to have a template in their mind that gives them a better sense. And I think being able to know that when you walk in a ring, it's not so much getting the order of the placements exactly right between us, because Andrew and I might look at this list of dogs.
Whoa! Stop on both barrels. Let's dwell on that. I think that's
it's beautiful.
I love that picture.
Beautiful.
I've never seen it before. I love it. Sorry, Don, I had to interrupt there.
But I think the fact is that there should be an expectation that we would get the quality dogs into the lineup. And then in the order in which we place them, if you have those quality dogs, that's a conversation, right, about where you prioritized or where your subjectivity comes in. But we should all agree on what are the quality dogs in that class. We should all be able to get to that point. And then who's first, second, third, and fourth, that makes for great cocktail chatter.
Yeah, sure.
Well, we have gone way, way too long. And I could go on for another hour.
Oh my God, I just looked at the time.
Yeah, right. I just want to.
Oops, sorry, we've overrun.
Well, I'm shocked. I think we answered primarily a hunting dog. Somebody says, what faults would we like to see eradicated?
How about we reframe that? Let's reframe that. Which virtues do we want to see in greater amounts? Right?
I'm with you on that.
Yes.
What
virtues do we want to see more of? Right.
The fault I would like to see eradicated is fault judging.
Okay. This has been great. We have 3 quick questions we'd like people to answer before they sign off. And I can't thank you enough for this. I hope that breeders are taking away the idea of using virtue to go over virtue to the blueprint to grade their litters on the ground, and that judges are taking away the virtue of the dog. And it may be that the odd man out has more virtues than the others.
Yep.
And I hope we do more of these because you guys have been great. Thank you for your time. Patricia, you want to have anything else you want to say?
No, I think you've covered it well. And I do thank both Andrew and Donald. We probably could have done this for another hour and still have found it interesting.